Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Umut Korkut. I'm a political scientist. I'm an associate professor in political science at Glasgow Academic University. Actually, this room is an impressive place for me as well, because in 2013 I launched my book on Hungary here, and I've been a rather frequent guest at András University. And thanks very much to Friedrich Ebert Foundation for the invitation, as well as the organization here at András University. It's good to see some friendly faces around, as well as my colleague Georgiana Turkulet, whom I'm working with at the Horizon 2020 funded project Respond, multi-level governance of mass migration in Europe and beyond. Also, I'm very glad to be able to actually respond and comment on Professor Chetty's talk. Now, I'm coming from European politics background, so I'm a very big believer of institutions as well as rights along with duties. So I was really glad to see that actually Professor Chetty as well, she emphasized the importance of bringing the duty together with rights in terms of refugee protection. Well, Professor Chetty effectively had two ideas. First of all, she talked about the fact that granting of asylum was a social institution until the 19th century, and during that she put emphasis on the Ottoman Empire. And then the second thing, she talked about the gift and societal duty-based kind of asylum, duty to provide hospitality, and how it's been embedded in the Middle East, in the Oriental cultures, in the Levant. My position is actually that I certainly agree with the fact that duty, well, there's a duty-based as well as a right-based solutions for refugee protection. However, perhaps the duty-based ideas they apply mostly for reception. But when it comes to protection and integration, I believe in the importance and the priority of rights, especially given the fact that how complicated it is nowadays, the whole asylum procedures. We cannot really maintain the protection and integration processes without having rights embedded, as well as the judiciary being a party to the whole process. Obviously, there's no way I would ever really underestimate the fact that the NGOs and volunteers, they play an extremely important role in terms of reception, definitely. But I don't really think that this is necessarily a Middle Eastern thing. I mean, we also saw it in Hungary in 2015 during the summer, the whole mobilization around the newcomers, how practically the grassroots, they brought themselves together, I mean, to help, and to give comfort for the newcomers, even though it was a new phenomena in this country. I think it was extremely important that we saw volunteers and NGOs, taking the lead and perhaps even paving the ground for the politicians to respond, although the response was not really in the way that we expected here in Hungary. So I think it was quite important. However, looking into the East, well, or the Orient as well, obviously I'm not an expert in the Middle East politics or societies as much as Professor Chetty is. My background is mostly Turkish politics because I'm Turkish. And I also did some research at the Turkish-Syrian border in 2014. And what was so interesting was that the duty-based discourses and arguments, they were very much visible and kind of obvious in Ankara. But the more you move to the border, the more people, they were talking about actually the difficulties of dealing with all the newcomers, especially in the absence of institutions. And especially in places like Kilis, it's like 4 kilometers practically from Syria. The governor of Kilis was practically talking about, we have no idea what to do because we have no integration policies. It could be that actually, simply, in the case of the Iraqis and the Iraqi refugees coming to Syria, I think Professor Chetty has an impressive kind of comment that they did not really go to the refugee camps, and that they found themselves rather comfortable and confident in the cityscape, almost like an extension of the urban society. It could be that it was the language that helped them more extensively. But in the case of Turkey, even if people, they ended up living in the cities, I mean, as Professor Chetty also showed us, most of these Syrian refugees, along with the Iraqi refugees and along with stateless people who came in the aftermath of the Syrian crisis, To Turkey, they live in the cities, but they're living in the perimeters of the cities. And there's no way we can say that they're part of the society in any way. Yes, they're part of the economy, but perhaps in the informal economy. And I suppose, if we have a system whereby the rights, they don't have the prominence, then we inevitably talk about an exploitation. Yes, in the case of Turkey, actually, they became part of the labor market. It could be the fact that because the Turkish economy could be a bit stronger than the Lebanese or the Jordanian economies, etc. But most of the time, actually, they are under very precarious kind of labor relations, and it also operated at the cost of pushing out kind of women as well as less skilled workers from the Turkish labor market. So it could be that perhaps the language plays a very big role, because through language, people, they could connect with each other, and through language, perhaps the families or relationships, they could be built. And that could be the reason why the Iraqi refugees, when they went to Syria in the aftermath of the 2003 crisis, they were part of the cityscape and the urban environment, but in the case of Turkey, they were pretty much stuck at the border, and they couldn't really move anywhere beyond that. So in this case, I couldn't really agree more with Professor Çetin that yes, the duty should come together with rights, because in the absence of rights, if the duty is not really embedded in the legal scape, then we cannot really talk about, especially protection and integration policies. But at the same time, although I really appreciated the fact that Professor Çetin was reflecting on the Ottoman settlement policies, yes, it's really true, actually from 1860s onwards, the Ottomans, they were settling not only Muslims coming from the Balkans or the Caucasus, but also even Jews were settled in various parts of Anatolia with the primary idea of practically creating new economies. So this was the idea whereby the Sultan allowed the settlement of various communities in various parts of mostly Anatolia and as well as the Levant, but the idea was practically to boost the economy. So I believe even with those kind of settlement policies, there was already some kind of an economic calculation in the minds of the rulers. Plus, if you have this kind of system whereby you are extending kind of asylum as a gift, you're always talking about a hierarchy, and this is inevitable. And Professor Çetin, she also reflected this thing, the fact that the gift comes together with the idea that you will respect the gift, but the hierarchy is really inevitable between the donor and the receiver. And if we don't really have rights embedded, and if we don't really have policies embedded, in that case, what we see is practically the donor-receiver relationship working on a temporary basis and not being all that clear actually where the boundaries of that temporary basis is. In fact, when we look into the discourse of Turkish politicians, especially the Turkish president, Tayyip Erdogan, when he talks about the Syrian refugees in the country, he always emphasizes on their temporariness. So according to him, these people are temporarily in Turkey. He uses the wording Ensar, actually, I'm sure you're aware of it. Ensar were the people who received the refugees who left Mecca, and then they went to Medina, and then the Medina people, they were really hospitable for them, and he really emphasizes on the fact that, that the Turkish population, they have to be Ensar, they have to be guide, but the Ensar metaphor in that particular case is practically also telling that these people are temporary, so they're going to go at some stage. But I mean, the Syrian crisis started in 2011, and it's not really ending anytime soon. So I'm not really sure practically to what extent we can still talk about their temporary position in Turkey any longer. So this means that we need to have, perhaps we may have the reception policies already, more or less, but we need to develop protection and integration policies, because I mean, if we don't have these kind of policies, 50 years later, we may still have people who are still in limbo, rather not in permanence in the Turkish society, and then their case would be rather sad in the absence of their rights. So in this case, obviously. I mean, we cannot really say that in societies whereby the relationship is built on duty, we cannot really say that these kind of societies, they avoid the responsibility. Obviously, the societies who receive refugees, they underline or sign under practically a contract of responsibility, because you're receiving these people. In any case, you would have to respond to these people, but the duration under which you're keeping yourself to your signature is extremely interesting. And I think that is what we're seeing in many polities at the moment. Simply, the people or the politicians are more or less questioning to what extent we're responsible and how long are we going to be responsible for the people who are looking for refuge in our shores. And this led to a certain quake in European politics, European political scene. I don't think it started in 2015. Maybe it reached the culmination after 2015. But reaching to certain unexpected events in the case of United Kingdom, practically where we both from, Britain leaving the European Union on the basis of migration being a very, very big issue. I mean, yes, there were so many other debates in the United Kingdom, whether the EU is democratic, the fisheries policies and all that. But I suppose when people voted, they thought about migration, and this was the biggest issue. And in the minds of an average British voter, I don't really think that they could really tell the difference between a refugee or an EU mobile person, as in the case of the Poles. It was pretty much like, we don't want anyone, full stop. And it didn't really stop in the United Kingdom either. I mean, in France, it was very, very close. I mean, don't forget Marine Le Pen. She was one of the front runners. Look at the Dutch politics, look at Austrian politics, look at Italian politics at the moment, etc. So we cannot really say that there's an element of something Eastern European here, whereby people, they really question their responsibilities in terms of humanitarian assistance. I mean, I've been lucky. I speak Hungarian. I understand Hungarian politics. I'm very interested as well. So I came on Wednesday evening just to watch the political campaign on Thursday. And I was in Békemenet, the Fidesz practical thing, taking photos, and then I wanted to walk down to MSP and then just to see what Karacan is going to talk about, but I got stuck at Kossuth tér. I couldn't really walk. So I was exposed to Orban and then the whole speech at over there, but I was also among the Fidesz voters, and that was a lot more interesting because in a way, I mean, Orban didn't say anything unexpected. And somehow the feeling is that these people individually, I don't think that they are bad people. I mean, if you fall on the ground, if something happens to you, probably they will help you. They will give you a hand. It's not as if they are going to let you down, but it is the penalty of evil. I mean, you just go back to Hannah Arendt, and now you look at the society, the group, and now you just question practically, why is the society acting this way? Why do they really feel themselves so much under challenge? Because Orban brings the whole thing together practically, and all the way to the Yenicheris and the Sultan and then the Labans and then the Habsburgs and all that, and he's depicting this another invasion is just around the corner. And meanwhile, when he's giving references, there are really embedded anti-Semitic references there as well. So in this case, you just wonder, a society which is an EU member, a very strong society, extremely talented country, a society as well, which managed to build, which managed to survive at the heart of Europe, why would they feel themselves under threat? But once again, this is not a typical thing to Eastern Europe. I think what we see in Hungary could be the culmination of societies feeling themselves under threat. And I don't think that this is really particular to Eastern Europe either, all the way from United Kingdom to the Turkish society, whereby the debates are extremely vigorous. What are we going to do with these people, right? So probably if you go further and look into Pakistan, and then you will see that their debates about what are we going to do with the Afghans are pretty much common everywhere. So in this context, who can really protect the newcomers? Could we still trust societies to protect the newcomers? Or do we really invest in institutions in order to embed rights so that the newcomer who will be susceptible, who will be vulnerable, by definition, at least they can have an institution to turn to. And in this case, I believe that we have to invest in practically, and I couldn't once again agree with Professor Chetty more in terms of micro-level integration, because I believe macro-level integration, I believe, is a disaster. It's a big failure. But I still believe that if we can bring societies together, especially small groups of people at the local level, we can still achieve something at the micro level. And at the micro level, if we can really convince people about their duties, but at the macro level, if we can really institutionalize the rights of the newcomers, then that will be an extremely successful society and the refugee system. Thanks very much. Hopefully it will.